We knew that if a fire broke out, if we couldn't catch it in the first 20 minutes, we were worried it would run thousands of acres. And that's exactly what ended up happening.
Captain Eric Scott of LAFD was on duty the morning of January 7th, the day the first of the Los Angeles fires started blazing. All 106 LAFD fire stations were at the ready, and the state and CAL FIRE deployed hundreds of additional resources across 7 counties, spanning about 40,000 square miles.
They have to have quick means of access to major thoroughfares like freeways, because will a fire pop during these significant wind events? If it does, where will it be? You don't know.
But despite all that prep,
it was like Los Angeles was in a boxing ring with a heavyweight, and you're getting punched and hit by fire after fire after fire.
Given all of the warnings we had, what went wrong and what could have been done better.
Captain Scott sat down with the Wall Street Journal to break down why firefighters struggled to keep these wildfires under control. On the morning of January 7th, the first brush fire broke out near the Hollywood Hills.
I mean, a simple brush fire, we're going to, anchor the origin of where that fire was. We're going to flank one side with a progressive hose lay. We're going to flank the other side. We're going to work to pinch it off and keep it small, and use air assets to drop water on the head of the fire and to protect the structures. We stomp those out all the time. You'll never hear about them because we don't ever let them get big.
Firefighters quickly extinguished that first fire, but
the winds were howling at this point. Little did we know that was nothing in comparison to what the winds were about to get to.
Just 20 minutes later, another call came through for a brush fire in the Pacific Palisades.
We got around to some of the canyons right as we're entering the Palisades, and you could see a significant loom up, a dark, ominous column of smoke spreading towards the PCH. And we knew that we were going to be in it for the long haul.
A top priority now was evacuations.
As the fire was moving in this direction, being pushed by the wind, we wanted to evacuate people through Sunset on the PCH towards Santa Monica, because the fire spread was starting to go in this direction, so we don't want them to go into the fire.
You had thousands of people jumping in their cars with their belongings and trying to flee through very few routes that go in and out of the neighborhood. People start abandoning their cars for fear for their lives. So now you have parked cars clogging the roads, and the fire department ultimately brought in bulldozers to move these cars out of the way to allow these firefighters to get up and fight the fire.
Then, just after 6 p.m. that day,
another fire popped.
The Eaton fire, outside of LAFD's jurisdiction. The Eaton fire created another front on the battlefield, requiring a unified command of not just the Los Angeles County Fire Department, but also Pasadena Fire and the United States Forest Services. By the end of the first day, initial reports showed 3 rapidly growing fires covering more than 3,000 acres, all threatening homes. And as night fell, visibility decreased. The wind picked up, reaching nearly 100 miles an hour in some places. This changed the fight.
You have 2 types of brush fires. You have a topography driven. It's going to move up the terrain, typically uphill, preheat, and go in a V pattern and be stopped at one of the 3 R's, a road, a ridge, or a river. A wind-driven fire is completely different. It takes those flames and moves them like a freight train throughout whatever direction it wants, and these ended up being erratic. I'm 6'4", 220. It knocked me off my balance multiple times.
Those winds also grounded the air fleet.
California relies heavily on its aerial firefighting force. That's because LA is nestled into these mountains. The fires tend to start in the mountains where there's a lot of brush, and so that's a lot more difficult to fight with fire trucks kind of going up these narrow roads.
LAFD can call in super scoopers to pick up water from large water sources and helicopters for water drops.
And then you're going to have larger fixed-wing aircraft that come in from other parts of California to drop retardant along ridge lines in front of the flame front. That is going to be a control point for us to try to stop the fire.
But when it's impossible to fly an aircraft safely or effectively,
It takes your whole shield down if you were in a battle.
without air support, firefighters on the ground were the primary source of containment. But they faced an additional challenge: water pressure. The first 2 water tanks around the Pacific Palisades, holding about 1 million gallons each, ran dry the first day.
Officials have noted that local water systems are not intended to fight fires at this scale and this level. It's just not what the system was designed for.
Firefighters were consuming water faster than the tanks could be refilled. And overnight, the third and final water tank in the Pacific Palisades ran dry. Firefighters faced similar issues battling the Eaton fire, made worse by a temporary loss of power.
When we pull up to a fire hydrant, we hope and expect to have water. If it doesn't have pressure or water, we typically have some other tactics.
Helipods and water tenders were brought in to provide additional water support.
Some local officials, though, have noted that even having that constant supply of water wouldn't have made a difference because these fires were so huge and so out of control.
Even the firefighters with water pressure were struggling.
You're shooting a large amount of water at your target hazard, the wind gusts and it would go 90 degrees the other direction. And then you'd move and augment and it would go the other direction.
By the end of day 2, firefighters were tackling 5 fires all around Los Angeles, covering more than 27,000 acres, with a 6th starting the next day. The Sunset, Hearst, Lydia, and Kenneth fires were more quickly contained, but it took days to begin containing the Eaton and Palisades fires. Part of the problem? Accessing the fire along rugged and steep terrain.
So what we have here is a progression map of the Palisades incident. The cooler colors are older, the warmer colors are more recent and still currently hot and or smoldering. So for us to get containment, we want to ideally get hose line around the entire burn perimeter.
Firefighters created a fire line by bulldozing, cutting and digging away vegetation, and by dropping water or fire retardant.
And that's done incrementally in the easiest areas often first, or really the target hazard areas that are most concerned first, and it's a slow progression. The first night that this started to pop off, we took resources, sent strike teams here and up throughout Mandeville Canyon because that's a very narrow area, and this became a new hard boundary for us that we do not want the fire to progress east beyond the 405 interstate.
For the Eaton fire, firefighters were first able to contain areas along the south and east, but in parts of the north, cliff faces made it unsafe for ground crews to establish a perimeter. Instead, they relied on aircraft when possible. It took 2 weeks for the Palisades fire to be 63% contained, and for the Eaton fire to be 89% contained. The information officials have now is preliminary.
After every large fire, there is an after-action review to determine what could have been done better.
There are still a lot of questions about the water supply, about whether residents got timely evacuation notices, particularly in Altadena, and whether brush was being managed properly in the areas where these fires started. But I think it will be months before we get any real clear answers or results from those investigations. It's too soon to know.
Early reports say 28 people died in the first 2 weeks of the LA fires, and more than 40,000 acres have burned, almost 3 times the size of Manhattan. But before these flames could even be fully contained, another wave of winds threatened firefighters' progress, fueled new wildfires, and sparked additional evacuation orders.
We have continually seen over the recent past years that wildfire season isn't a singular season, it's year-round.
And some of the homes that survived the fires will then be at risk of mudslides.
Wildfires tend to start in brush along the mountainside. That brush is what holds the mountainside in place. So now that this has been cleared out by the fires, as LA enters the rainy season, these homes that are left are now at risk of another disaster.